I want to take you on a journey from who I was to the awakening of who I am. Kintsukuroi, which literally means to repair with gold, is a way of living that embraces every flaw and imperfection. The idea that something that has been broken is more valuable because of its brokenness and not in spite of it. In the tea houses of Japan, where a ceramic pot or bowl would break, an artisan would lovingly restructure the piece of using gold or silver lacquer to create something stronger and more beautiful than it was before. The breaking was not something to hide, but instead something to celebrate and cherish. And in repairing, the bowl becomes a work of art that is more valuable than it was before. Once it was repaired, it took on a life of its own form from its rebirth. From this rebirth, a new sense of purpose, vitality, and resilience raises appreciation to even greater heights. The true life of the bowl begins the moment it is dropped. So it is not simply any mended object that increases in its appreciation, but the gap between the vanity of pristine appearance and the fractured manifestation of moral fate, which deepens its appeal. In other words, it is the proof of its resilience and fragility that truly makes it beautiful. I've spent the last several years crossing the globe, and in my humble travels, I've seen more trauma and more love than I could have ever imagined. I'm always in awe of humanity and its resilience, and I bow to our ability to transform and heal. I once heard someone say, you can never truly heal from your trauma. And, I'll let you decide if that is true or a false belief that is perpetuated through our society as a way to entrench us in even more trauma and fear. And it was in 1996 that I was scarring my arms with bite marks that were not visible, and I was grateful for my ribs that were sticking through my starving body. And I stood posing nude in broad daylight on the streets of Annapolis, Maryland with my photographer when 5 young Naval Academy men strolled by in their dress blues. It didn't take much convincing to allow a naked 19-year-old to lie across their outstretched arms for the perfect picture in my attempt to be a perfect 10. I always wanted to be a perfect 10, or so I thought. How many of you ever wanted that? You ever want to be a perfect 10? I thought that. In my late teens, I even tried to be accepted into that popular men's magazine called Perfect 10, for photographing artistic nudes as a way of getting the love and validation that I so desperately craved. We will seek outside what we were never shown as already residing within. It wasn't until the age of 10 that I realized that I have been a 10. I was a 10 since my childhood. I was a 10 out of 10 for adverse childhood experiences, or the ACE score. And an ACE score is like a report card for abuse and neglect before you turn 18. And like my high school report card, I had gotten all A's, and I'd gotten them all by the time I was 10. And as I read the 10 questions and slowly checked off yes for each one of those, I came to my true realization of my kintsukuroi, my ability to be broken and fragile and repair my life with resilience, purpose, and healing. The golden lacquer that has made it all the more valuable, rich, and beautiful. Each of us has a wound that has broken us so deeply that the only way to repair is with gold. In the process of mending, you will never believe that you can truly heal, that you will be grateful for the tragedy, and that you can turn it into and make it your greatest gift. Not only do you not believe it, you know it is impossible. Have you felt that? You know when it's impossible, until one day you find your first sprig of hope that turns into the golden flecks that become an experience of true gratitude, or gratitude for the trauma, something I call traumatude. And just like the bowl, whose true life begins when it's first broken, as began mine when I was first broken. My heart, my mind, and body are covered in this golden lacquer. And although I don't remember the first time, my true life began while I was in the womb, for I wasn't even meant to be born. Because I had a regression that took me back into my in my 30s, that took me there, and I remembered what I didn't know, that I was nearly beaten to death before I even took my first breath. From that moment forward, I remember the countless nights of terror as I huddled in my room, watching my mother be pulled across the room by her hair, or hearing the screams of agony. And at the age of 9, I became mother, caretaker, and solace for my 2 younger sisters, as our mother was taken from us and she was alive but gone, escaped to save herself from abuse. And by the time I was 10, I was left alone with my 4-year-old sister in an empty apartment with no furniture, with cockroaches, without food, and I was left to get nourishment from the neighbors, a married couple with an infant girl. The mother was gone and the baby was in the high chair, but they had food and a TV. And I thought it was surely heaven until he asked me to lie on his chest. And I watched as the TV show, and I felt his hands go down my pants, and I panicked. And my little sister sat on the floor. And I was saying, what would I do if I'd said anything? It took me 17 years to tell anyone, and I carried that guilt with me for all that time. In my mind, I caused harm to that little baby girl because I never told anyone. It was in that moment that I learned to be silent, that it was safer to not speak up, to do what anybody else wanted. I spent many nights that year alone, no father or mother to care for me. My hair was never combed and my clothes were dirty when I went to school, and I had no idea how to take care of myself, and I was severely shy and angry. So I read books, lots and lots and lots of books, 1,000-page adult books when I was only in the 4th grade, and I was teased and I quickly became suicidal. And it was a cold winter night when finally there was a knock at the door, and my grandpa said he had had enough and took me and my sister home with him. Then, as things kept going, I moved on into other years, and it took me years to shape my life into something that was meaningful. And then in 1994, vying for valedictorian of my high school, joining every sport that was offered, and seemingly living a normal teenage life, I was locked in a garage and brutally raped by a man 10 years my senior. I was a senior in high school, and my life came to a screeching halt. The bowl that was my life completely shattered, unable to hold its shape any longer. It took me more than 15 years before I started to mend it and find the traumatude. It took me 15 years of drugs and eating disorders and all sorts of crazy things. I just spent countless days numb, staring blankly out windows, listlessly doing puzzles and waiting for the school year and everything to end. Traumatude means the utmost gratitude for your traumatic experience, the modern day version of kintsukuroi, meaning to repair what only appeared to be shattered with the golden realization of your truth to heal. How many of you have a golden realization of your truth to heal? Within 6 years of my graduation from Waynesfield Goshen, I had gotten married and divorced. I had a beautiful daughter, Michaela, graduated from the Ohio State University, obtained and lost a corporate job, learned to hide my eating disorders and self-mutilation behind fitness regimens, became a regular drug user and a full-time drug trafficker, and I knew how to pretend that everything was okay. I never spoke about my trauma. To the contrary, I would have told you I fixed it all. I had burned my court cases in an Mulligania fire. I had the nightmares no longer came every night. And the endless supply of drugs and parties allowed me to easily hide my trauma in a beautiful box with a bow and pretend that it didn't exist. This was me in my 20s. But I knew it was there every time I returned home. Every time I entered the town, I would feel anger and sadness and rage build up inside me for what was lost and for what was taken. The house with the garage that I had been raped in sat directly across from the house that my grandpa had rescued me from so many years earlier, and catty-cornered to the Minix grocery store with my family name that my grandparents had owned and ran until I was a teenager. This invisible triangle that I call, that connected those three places, I called it the Bermuda Triangle. Enter and you may be lost forever. And when I drove into that triangle of terror on subsequent travels home, I knew I was not fixed, right? I could feel that black endless hole that I was slowly dragging my life and my body into. I never believed I could escape or that I would ever truly heal. And many times I just drove around saying, fuck you, before I drove on. And it's not what happens to you that matters. It is what you do with it that defines your life. So by 2004, I was on a whirlwind of destruction, quickly heading down to one of two places, the grave or to prison. I now realize that the synchronistic and magical events that saved me from myself so many times was not luck or chance, but my intuitive intelligence hitting me over the head like a 2x4 to awake me to my possibilities. In the basement of my large mansion-like home in German Village, I had a secret room. The walls of this room were white, but not from plaster. They were from a fine dusting of cocaine that had been built up over the previous year as we would grind and re-rock the coke with a 12-ton press. And then suddenly one night, something terribly scared me, and I called in a couple people to dismantle the press and take it away. This one small act would save me years in prison when a tragedy occurred only weeks later in my home. I barely escaped Ohio in 2004 with my life intact as I ran away to Florida, leaving behind my 6-year-old daughter. When you're not strong enough to save yourself, there's always a force that is offering its support to show you the way to your greatness. That force and that love and that connection I had for my daughter was it for me. It was an incessant love for her and my belief that we shared many lifetimes together that moved me towards saving myself. And I only came to know it later as was my connection to something greater that would help me to change everything. In 2004, I began to dig my way out. It felt like I had been dropped in this like massive well, and I was using my bare arms to scratch my way to the top. I spent 5 years trying to heal, thinking I was doing the right things. My body was sick from food disorders, exercise disorders, drugs. And then in 2009, I had my first real breakthrough. I stopped fighting and finally asked for the guidance and help that beyond my conscious capabilities. I had what I call that coming to Jesus moment. They call it the dark night of the soul, right? Any of that. This action landed me with an eviction notice, and I ended up bouncing from cars to friends' homes for nearly a year. And I asked for this, and what ensued was the journey to I am. It was the moment when you feel your heart being sewn back together and pulled apart at the same time. That golden thread of humanity, the Japanese ceramic bowls that have been reclaimed and lacquered with golden lace. A journey from broken and homeless to whole and fulfilling, serving as an international speaker and leader and spiritual teacher for thousands. This journey to intuitive intelligence became my sacred revolution. And it is not the situation or the event, but the lack of trust in ourselves that rattles us. It is the betrayal of our own identity and our beliefs that truly shake us to the core. This is when the opportunity comes to completely shift and transform. When you're stripped of everything, you must build from the ground, starting with trusting yourself first. You always knew the answers, you were just refusing to listen. Before every breakthrough, there's a breakdown. You must break down old beliefs, ideas, and habits to ascend to a new existence. I spent years breaking the habit of being me, that little girl that never grew up, that soul that had chosen this. I could never lead and I could never teach without having been in this darkness. To be the lighthouse shining in the darkness, you must first understand it, cherish it, love it, and hold it. Otherwise, you will always judge it and those in it. Sacred revolution comes when you not only let go of judgment and fear, but accept it, even the enemy, and forgive it. Realizing that forgiveness really doesn't exist, because why would you ever forget your greatest spiritual teachers? I slowly began to heal, and as I healed, I helped others to do the same. And I built that into a business, into intuitive intelligence. I was living proof of my kintsukuroi. Broken, I had seemed to lose my honor, yet in my brokenness, I had the ability to gain a whole new level of appreciation through my mending. So was I ever truly broken? I was becoming stronger, more beautiful, and more resilient than I was before. So I want to share with you this ability, this amazing, incredible experience of how do you take your brokenness and turn it into the most amazing experience that you can. I've learned so many things over the last 7 years 8 years now, I guess, of building my business into an international organization. I now train in the intuitive intelligence work, and I want to share it with you and with everyone else. We have trained people from all over the world at this point, and we're getting ready for our 2019 season and for our trainings. And we're doing retreats all over in Bali and in Australia and in Malibu, and we're doing immersions and we're doing live trainings. If you have a kintsukuroi or a traumatude, or you have something that you want to break into something new, I want to hear from you. Say yes below. I'd love to hear your story. Share with me a little bit about your dreams, about your past, about what you want to create. And let me see if we can do something together and make an experience. Because today and together, we can create something amazing and beautiful. Have a beautiful day. Bye.